Remarks to Indians, March 27, 1863. In order to fully understand Lincoln's remarks made to Native American tribal members at the White House on March 27, 1863, it is vital to understand Lincoln's history with Native Americans and the preceding conflicts between the United States and Native Americans that year. Lincoln's grandfather was murdered by Native Americans according to Lincoln's autobiographical sketch presented on December 20, 1859. In the early 1800s, New Salem, Illinois, sent a bounty on the head of a hostile Indian's scalp for $50 compared to $2 for the pelt of a wolf. An apathy since childhood, wrote an Englishman traveling through Illinois. They should not mind shooting an Indian, that a wild cat or raccoon. Once volunteers were called for at the outset of the Black Hawk War started, I shall enlist. Black Hawk is one of the most treacherous Indians there is, and I hope he will be shot, quote Abraham Lincoln. On April 21, 1832, Lincoln, at the age of 23, volunteered to fight in the Black Hawk War. Lincoln was soon elected captain and later stated, not since had any success in life which gave him so much satisfaction. The enlistment requirements ended 30 days after service. Lincoln re-enlisted twice, but never saw action of battle in his time in service. In a speech delivered on February 22, 1860, Lincoln referred to the superiority of whites based on the discovery of gold in the territory of which Indians and Mexicans lived for generations. He rhetorically asked, why did Yankees almost instantly discover gold in California, which had been trodden upon and overlooked by Indians and Mexican greasers for centuries? Lincoln also explained that phonetic writing was what separated whites from savages, and from that talent had derived the fruits of civilization, government, culture, etc. These events in the life of Lincoln help understand his remarks made to Indians on March 27, 1863. The events sweeping the country prior to Lincoln's meeting with the Native Americans help us understand the climate on Indian affairs in the country at the time. American-Indian confrontations continued to occur throughout the country as settlers continued to encroach traditional Native American settlements. On January 29, 1863, Union volunteer troops avenged the deaths of miners who were recently murdered by a member of the Shoshone tribe. Colonel Edward Connor marched his California volunteers from Salt Lake City to Idaho to engage the Shoshone in what was at first a fierce battle. As the Shoshone ammunition dwindled, the battle turned to a massacre, killing almost 300 Shoshone men, women, and children, many of whom murdered after the fighting. On March 27, 1863, President Lincoln meets with Native Americans at the White House. You have all spoken of the strange sights you see here, among your pale-faced brethren. Very great number of people that you see, the big wigwams, the difference between our people and your own. But you have seen but a very small part of the pale-faced people. You may wonder when I tell you that there are people here in this wigwam now looking at you, who have come from other countries a great deal farther off than you have come. Lincoln is referring to the White House as a wigwam. We, pale-faced people, think that this world is a great round ball, and we have people here of the pale-faced family who have come almost from the other side of it to represent their nations here and conduct their friendly intercourse with us, as you now come from your part of the round ball. Here a globe was introduced, and the President, laying his hand upon it, said, one of our learned men will now explain to you our notions about the great ball, and show you where you live. Basically, Lincoln is showing the Native Americans where they live, where the white people live, and where the white people have traveled from. This communicates to the Native Americans that the white people have traveled farther and are more determined and more technologically advanced in their quest to take what they wanted. Lincoln goes on to say, there is a great difference between this pale-faced people and their red brethren, both as to numbers and the way in which they live. We know not whether your own situation is best for your race, but this is what has made the difference in our way of living. The pale-faced people are numerous and prosperous because they cultivate the earth, produce bread, and depend upon the products of the earth rather than the wild game for substance. The President is basically saying the way to be prosperous in the world and increase your numbers as a population is to farm and utilize the resources of the land. He is suggesting that the white man's way of life is superior to that of the Native Americans. What is really interesting is what he says next. This is the chief reason of the difference. But there is another. Although we are now engaged in a great war between one another, we are not, as a race, so much disposed to fight and kill one another as our red brethren. This is a very interesting statement, considering it's made in the middle of the Civil War. Just earlier in the same month of March, 3 Civil War battles were fought: the Battle of Spring Hill, the Battle of Unionville, and the Battle of Kelly's Ford, accumulating a death toll in the hundreds. The Native Americans would have been aware of the carnage of the Civil War, and that would have challenged their idea of white superiority, not to mention the president's claim that the white man was more peaceful. As the conversation continues, Lincoln says, "You have asked for my advice. I really am not capable of advising you whether, in the province of the Great Spirit, who is the great father of us all, it is best for you to maintain the habits and customs of your race, or adopt a new mode of life. I can only say that I can see no way in which your race is to become as numerous and prosperous as the white race except by living as they do, by the cultivation of the earth." In conclusion, Lincoln states, "It is the object of this government to be on terms of peace with you and with all our red brethren. We constantly endeavor to be so. We make treaties with you and will try to observe them. And if our children should sometimes behave badly and violate these treaties, it is against our wish. You know it is not always possible for any father to have his children do precisely as he wishes them to do. In regard to being sent back to your own country, we have an officer, the Commissioner of Indian Affairs, who will take charge of that matter, and make necessary arrangements." It is interesting he uses the imagery of children doing not as the father directs. Perhaps this is a way to deflect the blame from him or the national government. After Lincoln's meeting with the tribal members, conflict continued throughout the country. One conflict occurred when Captain John Cody of the 8th Minnesota Regiment chased Sioux tribal members who stole horses on June 8, 1863. After pursuing the Sioux, the men engaged in a fight, and Cody was shot in the head and died almost instantly. The Sioux escaped. Events escalated through June. On the 10th, a war party of the Southern Ute tribe attacked a mail coach 30 miles west of Salt Lake City, and 2 employees were killed. On the 16th, General H. Selby and 3,200 troops gathered for operations against the Plain Indians. The Army's task was to push the Santee Sioux for their spring raid. Selby's force engaged the enemies 3 times over a 4-month span. By the 24th, 3 attempts to negotiate were ended by the murder of the army doctor. A skirmish soon followed, leaving 80 Sioux dead and 3 army officers, although 1 met his demise by lightning. Throughout July, skirmishes continued, including the involvement of Sitting Bull, but ultimately Selby's forces subsided once the Sioux were forced west of the Missouri River. Lincoln's controversy with Native Americans exemplified the popular belief of white men at the time period, that Indians were barbarous people who were a barrier to progress. In a speech, historians such as David Herbert Donald suggest that Lincoln welcomed the ceremonial visits of Indian chiefs dressed in their tribal regalia, both because they were exotic and because he rather enjoyed playing the role of their great father. This document, Remarks to Indians, March 27, 1863, appears that Lincoln was only interested in reducing the conflict on the frontier and expanding the prosperity of the white man. Lincoln displays a typical view for the age: white superiority over Native Americans. This creates an interesting confliction of the great emancipator. Lincoln valued the lives of African American slaves, but his views on Native Americans seems to be much different.